Hello folks, look what arrived from the courier guy. Brand new spanking, well not new really, just fresh suspension. If you watched my last video you'll know I'm not particularly happy with my suspension at the moment. I find the ride had become pretty harsh. There was lots of debate as to whether I'm now too light for the current springs I'm running. And bottom line, I'd lost confidence in the front end of the bike, and particularly at pace. I found it very nervous and very uncomfortable. So I sent it down to those pros at TBR, and they've made a few changes. So we've elected to keep the springs I'm on. That's 2 stages harder than the stock spring for this bike to cater for my weight. But I've asked TBR to make a change to the valves in the forks to soften off the initial sort of 1 to 2 inches of compression. And we've added a bladder to the rear to try and settle it down a little from a shock perspective. So here I am just putting it all back together, about to ride tomorrow. I'll give you some more commentary a little further on in the video as to what my experience was and if I feel we've gone in the right direction.
Is it feeling good this morning, Paulie?
Yeah, I did fiddle a bit as well. I slowed down my compression.
Yeah.
Off my rebound. I seem to have made it much better.
I find it's the one thing I suppose because it's not the easiest to adjust, but often if you're uncomfortable you look rebound first rather than
So I'm
compression.
Softer on my compression.
Yeah, slower on the rebound. Of course, all this talk about suspension when really I just need to move my head 3 inches further forward most of the time.
Do you know what I also think? I think maybe these S3 pegs are not great for these Huskies because we're too far back already. So that's why it's keeping the front light. I think for a KTM and that.
No, it's a fair comment. It's actually why I adjusted my less sag in the bike to keep it down on the nose a bit, and it does feel better this morning. So.
So folks, we started with a fairly technical ride, and the changes I've made to the forks and the shock are not really going to make much of a difference here. If you listen to the real experts, the guys who really know what they're talking, the pros, they will always tell you for extreme enduro and hard enduro, try and run the bike as soft as possible. But for as much as we like to say we do hard enduro or extreme enduro, most rides have a lot of high-paced stuff too. And that's most certainly the case with the Impi. I would imagine that 70 to 80% of even the silver route, for example, is what I'd call medium to high speed. And for those sort of conditions, for me, it's very important that I'm really comfortable on the bike, but also that I trust it, that I have a lot of faith in the front end. If either of those 2 conditions are missing, I tend to ride very tense, very conservatively, certainly very slowly, but ironically, I crash a lot more.
One, two, three. Okay, come up now.
So we've reached a point in the video where there's a lot of toiling and bench pressing of bikes going on, and you know, all my suspension adjustments are not going to make too much of a difference here. The improvements I've made will be in evidence a little while later when we get to some faster riding, and I'll comment on those then as well. But the long and the short of it is, I had this concern about the springs are too heavy. I now weigh 85 kilograms. I should be riding with the standard springs for the bike. It's set for 75 to 85 kilogram rider normally. I'm 2 steps harder than that. Just as an example, I'm on a 48 rear spring, and the front springs in the forks match that. So that's quite a big step. I mean, it's almost a 20 kilogram swing that we're taking there. But I think when I chatted to TBR, I talked about this, and they said you're perhaps too heavy on your springs. But I said, listen, I really like the fact that I trust the bike on the downhills, that you can drop off things. I have a lot of faith in the front end, and a lot of Impi, for example, is very nasty downhills, and you want to have faith in your bike and be able to ride it down. So I didn't actually want to move away from a bike that stood up firmly in its springs, that could handle big drop-offs and steep downhills and give me some comfort doing that and confidence. On the other hand, it's just beating me up on the fast stuff over broken rocks and loose sections, and that's pretty exhausting. So we compromised. We made a valving change up front, softened off the initial sort of 2 inches of the stroke to just give me some more comfort and keep that front wheel attached to the terrain. And that little softness will also bring you a bit of grip too. So the bike, the theory is that the bike wouldn't then understeer or skip or wash the front end when I was looking to turn it. The other was just the rear. And the rear of the bike was just a little harsh, particularly on the acceleration. I had these very short, sharp impacts and movements up and down, and it wasn't the most comfortable thing in the world. So we put a blade in the back to take care of that.
Shit. Shot. Ah, you son of a bitch.
Yeah.
Shot. Yeah, we're good. That was a close one.
It wasn't much run up. I was worried about it too.
Yeah,
It was a cold box.
it's just too far back on the bike.
There's too much play here.
Thank you, car. Hey, nicely done, boy. Oh, fuck. Okay. We good. Thanks, buddy. Although, yeah. Jesus, man.
Finally, a little bit of faster stuff, and I can now talk about whether we've improved or not in terms of the changes we've made to the suspension. So a little confession here, this is not my first ride back that you're watching now with the improved suspension. It's in fact the second. The first one was awful. I was completely unhappy with the way things had turned out and the changes I'd made. Had no confidence in the front whatsoever. It still felt harsh. I felt like I had no grip on the front. And when I went to throttle, I got no grip on the back either. So it just was all at sea, and I was actually at a loss to explain how, in theory, the things we wanted to change would work, and then they just didn't. Then I thought about it a bit, and I realized that in putting all the suspension back together and bolting it back into the bike, I'd been under a lot of time pressure, and I hadn't done two vital things. I hadn't checked, firstly, that my front wheel was centered in the forks, and that those bolts were nipped to the right setting. And secondly, I hadn't checked the sag. I just made this assumption the sag would be the same on the shock. When I measured it, it was completely out. I had a sag of 115, whereas I normally ride with a sag of 110 at the back. And also my forks were binding up. Because the forks weren't aligned, the wheel was not moving up and down perfectly and getting the full use of the stroke. So having attended to both those things, this is the following ride, and I can tell you it's way better. I'm far more confident in the front. I trust it a lot more. It steers very well, so the handling is great. And there's definitely more comfort because we've softened off that initial part of the stroke. And with the sag set right, the attitude of the bike is good. So when it comes time for traction and I have to get back on the bike and get it to grip up, it grips up and we go. So I'm very happy with the changes we've made. Folks, I'm not supported in any way by TBR, and I derive no benefit from them, or even indeed these videos. There's no monetization going on here at all. But I just want to take the opportunity to say what great service they provide and how good they are with advice, and that you can phone them and ask them questions, and you can ask them to customize your forks or your shock for you. It's, you know, Will Slater's the guy I chatted down there. Wayne obviously handles the business side of things, but it's so cool to be able to talk to somebody with so much experience who's willing to have a chat and listen and help you in your journey to getting the best possible bike that you can get. So if you're looking for anything in the suspension side of things, it doesn't matter, they're based down in Maritzburg. You just courier it there, it comes back. Their service is exceptional. Apologies, they're not in Maritzburg, they're in Hilton. And yeah, just a shout out to them. Very grateful for the bike I now have, which is comfortable and confidence inspiring. Right, I'm going to stop talking now. Don't have much else to say really, other than I really enjoyed this ride. It was a lot of fun. We flowed, we did some tough terrain. I really enjoyed it on another typically beautiful high-felt day in winter. So yeah, if you're here for the POV, just stay tuned and watch till the end of the video. And by the way, if you've made it this far, for heaven's sake, subscribe, man. It's not that hard. I'll catch you on the trails, guys.
Let's try not to do the same thing. Try not to do the same thing. Oh no, I don't know what it's doing. We got plenty of two-stroke. I brimmed it.
It's so cold and wet there. The slips.
Yeah. Lekker boys! 2 hours 15.3. He is. So day for the old farts. do? Hit a rock.
Hit a rock.
A lurker. You shock your wrist.